So, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the Nikon 135 F2 defocus lens. I've been asked by several people actually, because I mentioned it in one of my previous videos. I was talking I think mainly about the D780 versus the D700. Several of you have asked if I could talk a bit more about the 135 F2D lens. Because it's a bit unique, and I think I hinted at that in the previous video. So I'm going to explain today why I think this is unique from a technical viewpoint, without getting too over the top, what I use it for, and just maybe be encouraged to actually try and find one of these and get one of these for your own photography. Let me explain what I use it for. Firstly, obviously for my wedding photography, I use mainly my 50 1.4 Sigma art lens. Probably accounts for about 60% of the shots during the day. The Nikon 35 F2D lens, this tiny little guy here, probably accounts for another 35 odd percent. And that lens, oh, I've also got a zoom lens 16 to 35, 16? Yeah, 16 to 35 for the really big shots, for group shots where I haven't got enough space to use this one. So I have got a short zoom lens as well. And the 135, and I don't know if you can see it on the screen there, that is a typical kind of shot that I would use the 135 for at a wedding. To get candid shots of the guests when they're just mingling, chatting to each other and that kind of thing. Similar sort of shots for the bride and groom, of course. And there'll be a few occasions, maybe during the ceremony, I'll swap from the 35 to the 135 to get literally half a dozen shots of the bride perfectly in focus and then the groom perfectly in focus when they're actually during the ceremony, when they're exchanging vows and that kind of thing. So it's a bit limited with the use that I use it for and that it's intended for. It is a portrait lens, and let me explain to you why I think it's the best portrait lens you are ever going to find. And let me explain technically why it's so special. This is not based on laboratory tests. This is my personal experience gained by taking a few thousand shots with that and with other 135 lenses. Because when I went, well, let me explain this first. So why is this special? Nikon patented the defocus system in this I think it was sometime in the 80s. And in 1990, I believe it was, they came out with an earlier version of this lens, which didn't have the contacts, where they gone? Or it had some of the contacts, but not all of these. So it didn't talk to the 3D matrix metering system, and it was improved in '95 when this model came out, and this now works perfectly with any Nikon camera with the screw drive for the focusing. Doesn't have an internal focusing motor. And what Nikon did, I will try and explain here without getting too complicated. Let's take a graph where we've got distance, so further away from the camera, and we've got focus, and we've got completely out of focus down here, and we're going up here, and at this point here it's tack sharp, we're perfectly in focus. And if we look at a normal, in quotes, 135 lens, my interpretation is that the focus improves. Sorry, you focused on something here at this distance from the camera. That's what you're focused on. If you look at the degree of focus in the picture, it comes up to something like this, and I'm assuming we're talking either 1.8 or f2. Okay, so wide open. You're going to have an area that is in focus. You could get really picky and say, well, actually, there's only like a millimetre in focus. but we're not talking about that. We're talking about practical in focus. So we're talking about the difference between her eye being in focus here and this eye being noticeably out of focus. We're not talking about laboratory tests here. You've got an area here that is acceptably tack sharp, and it's going to cover a certain distance, and I've exaggerated it here. It's probably a lot less than that, but to try and explain. And we get more and more in focus until at a certain point that image, that part of the image, comes into focus. We get further away and then it starts to drop off again and goes out of focus. This area here is what we call the bokeh. It's the background blur. It's what's happened to the background. What does this part of the image look like? And that is key, not just a bit in focus. That is key to the look of this lens and other 135 lenses. What they seem to have been able to do with this lens, and I don't know how they do it, but what seems to happen is the focus drops off a lot more quickly with this lens than with other 135 lenses. And I've had 2 or 3. I've had a Sigma, I think I had a Tamron at some point. So it drops out of focus a lot quicker. You've still got roughly the same sort of area of amount in focus at that point, but once we get beyond that, we get a lot more of the background out of focus. That's one thing. And we'll look at this. I'll switch to the screen after I finish talking and actually show you in detail some of the photos. What they've done with the defocus control is, normally that's it. You focus on that bit, you get a little bit behind and a little bit in front of what you're actually focused on in focus. And depending on the aperture, that might be typically this lens at that sort of distance, it's probably an inch if you're lucky. If you go obviously to f4, f5.6, that inch then becomes 2-3 inches in focus, perfectly in focus. But as I say, this lens seems to drop off a lot quicker. And what they've enabled you to do with the defocus control, and by the way, what that is you've got a separate ring here, which you don't get on other lenses, and you've got the F numbers here. And what you can do is, by moving that ring, you can move the focus point forward or backwards within this area that's, in quotes, in focus. So if you move it to the back, the focus point is here, so your image is still in focus, but anything behind, so say you're focused on her eye, whereas on a normal 135 lens, this eye would be a little bit out of focus. Using the defocus control, you can move the focus point. It doesn't change the focus, it just moves, somehow moves the lenses inside and makes the lens, the image, go out of focus very much sooner behind your focus point. So whereas on a normal lens, this eye might be a little bit out of focus, using the defocus control, you can make that other eye go very much out of focus while still retaining perfect focus on her eye. It's a lens to be used carefully, because if you have anything too much forward of what you're focused on, that's going to be more in focus, because you've got more in focus in front of your focus point. And therefore, in some situations, say if she had I can't get the words out, her hand up in front of her face, then that too would be in focus, and it can make it look a bit weird. So it does need to be used sparingly and in the right situation. But in this sort of portrait situation, it works beautifully. And what that does then, the image drops out of focus even sooner than a typical 135 lens. That's how it works. How that is actually achieved internally, I have no idea, and I don't really care. I just know it works in practice. When I'd used this on the D750 and I switched to Sony, I knew that I loved this lens. So when I got the Sony, I also wanted a 135 lens, and I got the Sigma 135 1.8 art lens. And we'll look at the images in a moment. And I never found those images to be as pleasing as images from this. Both 135 boast almost the same aperture, 1.8 and f2, but this one was just a heck of a lot better. The build quality it's built like a tank. It weighs as much as the camera does. So I don't know how much it weighs, but it's pretty well all solid metal construction. Beautiful feel, lovely build quality. Difficult to get. They still make them, I believe, but I think they've only made about 5,000 of these since 1995. So difficult to get. This particular one. Okay, let's nip onto the computer and we'll have a look at some of the images, and I'll try and explain why I think this is such a fantastic lens. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and as I say, this was taken on the, let's just check on, let's go back to the library, 135, so I'm actually at f3.5, not f2, on the D750, as I thought. Right, so first of all, sharpness. This lens is sharp. Okay, I don't think you're going to find many lenses that are any sharper than that. As I say, I've had the 135 1.8 Sigma art lens, which possibly is just a tiny bit sharper, but do you really want anything sharper than that? I mean, I already this isn't a photo that I've actually edited and given to the client. You know, to make this into a good photo, I'm going to need to spend 4 or 5 minutes editing and getting rid of spots and dimples and bumps and so on and so forth. Do I want any more of a problem than that? Probably not. So that's the kind of sharpness that you can expect. Now, on that note, it is not always easy to get that sort of sharpness. I would say with this lens that you need to expect around about 30% not to be tack sharp. It just is so critical. It's got such a shallow depth of field, and the lighting needs to be really good. The focus point needs to get really good contrast in order to focus really accurately. In fact, on the D780, which I've now got, I've been playing around with live view, and of course in live view you can do a magnified look through the lens, and that kind of does that for you in camera, and you can, if you want, manually focus, or if you're using the small spot focus in live view on the on the D780, which is basically the Z6 focusing system, it gives you a square kind of that sort of size, and you can just check that it's actually focused on the eye and not on that eye or on her lips or on her ear or something like that. You can check. If you want to, you can go completely manual. I wouldn't actually do that at a wedding. It's just too slow, but it can certainly check, and you can maybe hit the back button focus again and give it another chance to get perfect focus. So if we now jump forward to 2019 and look at my Sony A7 Mark III, we've got some 135mm lens shots. So if we now look at the Sigma art lens, which is 1.8, let's just have a look at that first. Okay, what we're looking at now is the Sigma 135 1.8 art lens. And I actually made a mistake earlier. I said I got this for the Sony. I didn't. I got it for the Nikon D750 to compare the two lenses. The reason I did it was because I was hoping that the Sigma lens, being a more modern lens with its own internal focusing motor and being Sigma, would be easier to focus because, as I say, the Nikon isn't that easy to focus. It is going to have quite a few out of focus shots, and just to see the actual sharpness from the Sigma, it is brilliantly sharp. But I wouldn't say it's, if we could compare two exact photos side by side, I don't think you'd have any complaints that the Nikon wasn't sharp enough. So we're really concerned more with the background and with its focusing abilities. And I've just literally popped along a few on the strip here and picked another one pretty much at random. It was actually one that I did give to the client because it's outlined in red. And if we zoom in again, so we're talking the Sigma here, that isn't tack sharp. So the Sigma also finds it difficult sometimes to get absolutely tack sharp focus when you're shooting it wide open. So to give you another comparison, here we've jumped back to the Nikon F2 135 lens, and you can see, I hope, what I mean about the Nikon lens drops out of focus a lot quicker than the Sigma. Even though the Sigma is a 1.8 and the Nikon is only an F2, you can see here that her eye is absolutely bang on in focus. I haven't zoomed in yet, but this eye is well out of focus, and he was only 6 inches back from her. I mean, he's just so blurred, it's just not true. And I'll round this off with this final shot here on the Nikon. That's on the D780, taken a couple of weeks ago at my shoot with my guitarist here, who wanted some more profile shots for his huge YouTube channel. He wanted a shot with everything out of focus apart from his fingers and the sort of the frets on the guitar here. So we're at f2, and this demonstrates, I think, quite well just how much is in focus. Now I'm not exactly sure. I think I can see his fingers are on these two strings here, and I'm guessing one of his other fingers is on this string, which is really the one I want to concentrate on. The fact that this string looks like it's vibrating isn't, I don't think, the string vibrating, because, as I say, he would have his finger on that, and even if he's actually playing that string, it wouldn't be vibrating past his finger. So this, what looks like a string vibrating, is actually the fact it's going out of focus. So you can see there we've got that much depth of field, which I'm guessing is probably about 1/4 of an inch, 5-6 millimeters, and the minimum focusing distance on that is about a meter, so I'm probably just over a meter away, and we've got 5 or 6 millimeters, so an incredibly short, incredibly shallow depth of field, which, if used correctly, gives great shots. If used incorrectly, they can give you some interesting but really quite weird photos, where she's perfectly in focus, or her eye is, maybe her hair. I can't get the words out. What's up with me? Her hair, but he's so far out of focus, it actually doesn't make a good photo. But usually right in the right situation, and I think you get some absolutely super shots, and this is what I use it for at weddings, to create these sort of photos, candid but still beautiful photos with lovely backgrounds, and It's just my style of wedding photography now, and I use this quite a lot whenever I can. I hope you found that useful. Obviously, if you've got any comments or queries, drop those in the box below, and I'll see you on my next video. Thanks for now. By the way, Happy New Year.